Welcome to History for Snooze. Every page of history holds the footprints of time, the laughter of crowds, the glow of torchlight, and the joyful traditions that once brought entire communities together. Here, we will travel back to the past, slowly, gently, so we can almost hear the whispers of healers, the prayers of the sick, and the quiet footsteps of those who carried hope through uncertain times. Tonight, our story drifts into the world of medieval medicine history, from the herbal remedies passed down through generations, to the mysterious practices of physicians and monks, and the fragile balance between faith and science. These tales reveal how people in the Middle Ages struggled, endured, and sought healing in a world filled with both wonder and fear. Before we start, dim the lights, settle into a comfortable spot, and let the world outside fade away. I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Your small gesture is my greatest inspiration to keep telling these stories. And in the comments, let me know where in the world you're listening from. I'd love to know how far these stories travel. Now, close your eyes and join me on this quiet journey, where history is not just a record of events, but a soft-spoken story that will guide you toward peace, and maybe even toward sleep. The medieval period, spanning roughly from 500 to 1500 CE, represents one of the most fascinating and complex eras in the history of medicine. Far from being the dark ages of medical knowledge as once characterized, this millennium witnessed remarkable continuity, innovation, and cross-cultural exchange in medical theory and practice. Medieval medicine was a rich tapestry woven from classical Greek and Roman traditions, Islamic scholarship, Christian theology, folk remedies, and emerging empirical observations. During this period, medical knowledge was preserved, transmitted, and expanded through three major civilizations: the Islamic world, the Byzantine Empire, and Western Europe. Each contributed unique perspectives and methodologies that would ultimately lay the groundwork for Renaissance medicine and, eventually, modern medical practice. The medieval approach to medicine was fundamentally holistic, viewing health and disease through the lens of humoral theory, astrological influences, and divine intervention. This comprehensive examination of medieval medicine will explore its theoretical foundations, practical applications, institutional development, and the remarkable individuals who shaped medical thought during this transformative period. We will journey through the preservation of ancient knowledge in monasteries and Islamic institutions, the rise of medical schools and universities, the development of hospitals, and the gradual emergence of more empirical approaches to understanding the human body and disease. Medieval medicine did not emerge in a vacuum but was built upon the substantial foundations laid by ancient civilizations, particularly the Greeks and Romans. The works of Hippocrates, c. 460 to 370 BCE, often called the father of medicine, provided the ethical framework and observational methodology that would dominate medical thinking for over a millennium. The Hippocratic Corpus, a collection of medical texts attributed to Hippocrates and his followers, established fundamental principles including the famous Hippocratic Oath, which set ethical standards for medical practice that resonate even today. Perhaps even more influential was Galen of Pergamon, 129 to 216 CE, whose comprehensive medical system dominated medieval thought. Galen's anatomical studies, based primarily on animal dissection since human dissection was forbidden in his time, provided detailed descriptions of bodily structures and functions. His theoretical framework, combining Hippocratic humoral theory with Aristotelian natural philosophy, created a coherent medical system that explained health, disease, diagnosis, and treatment in terms accessible to medieval scholars. Galen's four humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, each associated with specific qualities, hot, cold, wet, dry, and temperaments, became the cornerstone of medieval medical theory. According to this system, health resulted from the proper balance of these humors, while disease arose from their imbalance. This theory provided a unified explanation for all medical phenomena and remained largely unchallenged until the Renaissance. The decline and eventual fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century CE created significant challenges for the preservation and transmission of medical knowledge. The political instability, economic disruption, and social upheaval that followed threatened to destroy centuries of accumulated medical wisdom. However, several factors contributed to the preservation of this crucial knowledge. Christian monasteries emerged as crucial repositories of learning during this turbulent period. Monks, driven by their religious duty to care for the sick and their commitment to preserving knowledge, carefully copied and maintained medical texts. Monasteries like Monte Cassino in Italy and the Abbey of St. Gall in Switzerland became centers of medical learning, maintaining libraries that housed classical medical works alongside religious texts. The monastic approach to medicine was inherently holistic, viewing healing as both a physical and spiritual endeavor. This perspective, while sometimes limiting scientific inquiry, ensured that medical knowledge remained connected to broader philosophical and theological frameworks that would characterize medieval medicine. During the early medieval period, medical practice was largely decentralized and varied significantly across different regions and social classes. In rural areas, folk healers, often women, provided most medical care using traditional remedies passed down through generations. These healers possessed extensive knowledge of herbal medicines, surgical techniques for common ailments, and midwifery practices. Urban centers, though fewer and smaller than in Roman times, maintained some degree of professional medical practice. Physicians, usually educated in monasteries or through apprenticeships, served the wealthy and powerful. However, the distinction between physician, surgeon, and pharmacist was often blurred, with many practitioners combining multiple roles. The early medieval period saw the development of several important medical texts. The Medicina Plinii, derived from Pliny the Elder's Natural History, provided practical medical advice and herbal remedies. Similarly, the works of Isidore of Seville, c. 560 to 636 CE, helped preserve and organize classical medical knowledge for medieval readers. The Islamic conquest of vast territories in the 7th and 8th centuries brought Muslim scholars into contact with the medical traditions of conquered peoples, including the Greek, Persian, and Indian systems. Rather than rejecting this knowledge, Islamic civilization embarked on an ambitious project of translation, preservation, and expansion that would prove crucial for the development of medieval medicine. The translation movement, centered in Baghdad's House of Wisdom, Beit al-Hikmah, systematically rendered Greek medical texts into Arabic. Scholars like Hunayn ibn Ishaq, 809 to 873 CE, not only translated but also critically evaluated and corrected ancient texts, improving upon the original Greek versions. This process ensured that classical medical knowledge was not merely preserved but actively refined and enhanced. The Islamic approach to medicine was characterized by several key features that distinguished it from earlier traditions. First, Islamic physicians emphasized the importance of observation and experience alongside theoretical knowledge. Second, they developed a sophisticated understanding of anatomy and physiology through careful clinical observation. Third, they established the first true hospitals as institutions dedicated to medical care, teaching, and research. Abu Bakr Muhammad ibn Zakaria al-Razi, 854 to 925 CE, known in the West as Razes, exemplifies the Islamic approach to medicine. Often considered the greatest physician of the medieval period, al-Razi made groundbreaking contributions to clinical medicine, medical education, and pharmaceutical science. Al-Razi's most famous work, Al-Hawi fi al-Tib, the Comprehensive Book of Medicine, was an enormous medical encyclopedia that compiled knowledge from Greek, Persian, and Indian sources alongside his own clinical observations. This work, later translated into Latin as Liber Continens, became one of the most influential medical texts in medieval Europe. Perhaps more importantly, al-Razi wrote Kitab al-Judari wa al-Hasba, a treatise on smallpox and measles, the first accurate clinical description of these diseases. His careful observation and documentation of symptoms, progression, and treatment established new standards for clinical medicine. Al-Razi's approach emphasized the importance of careful observation, detailed case histories, and systematic recording of treatments and outcomes. Al-Razi also made significant contributions to medical ethics and the doctor-patient relationship. His works emphasized the physician's responsibility to the patient regardless of social status, and he developed guidelines for medical education that stressed both theoretical knowledge and practical experience. Abu Ali al-Husayn ibn Abd Allah ibn Sina, 9801037 c., known in the West as Avicenna, was perhaps the most influential medical writer of the medieval period. His Al-Canon fi al-Tib, the Canon of Medicine, synthesized Greek medical theory with Islamic clinical experience and philosophical insights, creating a comprehensive medical system that dominated medical education for centuries. The canon was organized into 5 books covering medical theory, simple drugs, diseases of specific organs, general diseases, and compound medicines. This systematic approach made medical knowledge more accessible and teachable, contributing to the establishment of formal medical education programs. Avicenna's contributions extended beyond compilation and organization. He made original observations about contagious diseases, developed new surgical techniques, and advanced the understanding of anatomy and physiology. His work on pulse diagnosis was particularly sophisticated, distinguishing different types of pulses and their diagnostic significance. The canon's influence on medieval European medicine cannot be overstated. Translated into Latin in the 12th century, it became the standard medical textbook in European universities and remained in use well into the 17th century. The work's combination of theoretical sophistication and practical applicability made it invaluable for medical education. Abu al-Qasim Khalif ibn al-Abbas al-Zahrawi, 9361013 CE, known in the West as Abulcasis, made revolutionary contributions to surgical medicine. His Al-Tasrif Liman Ajiz and Al-Talif, the Method of Medicine, was the most comprehensive surgical text of the medieval period, containing detailed descriptions of surgical procedures, instruments, and techniques. Al-Zahrawi's surgical innovations were remarkable. He developed new surgical instruments, many of which remained in use for centuries. His descriptions of surgical procedures were precise and detailed, covering everything from cataract extraction to the removal of bladder stones. He also made significant advances in obstetrics and gynecology, developing new techniques for difficult births and surgical procedures for women's health issues. The surgical sections of Al-Tasrif were illustrated with detailed drawings of instruments and procedures, making it not just a text but a visual guide for surgical practice. This approach to medical education, combining text and illustration, would become increasingly important in medieval medical texts. The Islamic world developed the first true hospitals as institutions dedicated to medical care. These hospitals, called bimaristans, were far more sophisticated than their predecessors and served multiple functions. They provided medical care, conducted medical research, and trained physicians. The bimaristan of Baghdad, established in 805 CE, served as a model for hospital development throughout the Islamic world. These institutions were typically large, well-funded establishments that provided free medical care to all patients regardless of social status, religion, or ability to pay. They were staffed by trained physicians, surgeons, and pharmacists, and equipped with libraries, pharmacies, and specialized wards for different types of patients. The hospital system also revolutionized medical education. Unlike the apprenticeship system that dominated European medical training, Islamic hospitals provided formal medical education programs. Students learned through direct observation and participation in patient care, supervised by experienced physicians. This clinical approach to medical education was far more systematic and effective than previous methods. Islamic physicians made remarkable advances in pharmaceutical science, developing new drugs, improving preparation methods, and establishing standards for drug quality and safety. They built upon Greek and Persian pharmaceutical knowledge while adding significant innovations of their own. Islamic pharmacists developed new techniques for drug preparation, including distillation, sublimation, and crystallization. They created new pharmaceutical forms, such as syrups, ointments, and electuaries, that were more effective and easier to administer than previous preparations. The Islamic world also established the first pharmaceutical regulations, requiring pharmacists to pass examinations and maintain standards for drug preparation. This regulatory approach ensured higher quality and safer medications, contributing to improved patient outcomes. The 11th and 12th centuries witnessed a remarkable revival of learning in Western Europe, often called the Renaissance of the 12th century. This intellectual awakening had profound implications for medical knowledge and practice, as European scholars gained access to the vast corpus of Islamic medical literature through translation projects centered in places like Toledo, Spain, and southern Italy. The Crusades, while primarily military campaigns, also facilitated cultural exchange between the Islamic world and Western Europe. European knights and clerics encountered Islamic medical practices firsthand, often receiving superior medical care from Muslim physicians. These experiences challenged European assumptions about the superiority of their own medical traditions and encouraged the adoption of Islamic medical knowledge. The translation of Islamic medical texts into Latin was a monumental undertaking that transformed European medicine. Key figures like Gerard of Cremona, 1114 to 1187, and Constantine the African, 1020 to 1087, rendered major Islamic medical works into Latin, making them accessible to European scholars. Constantine's translations of works by Al-Razi and others introduced European physicians to new diagnostic techniques, pharmaceutical preparations, and surgical procedures. The School of Salerno. The medical school of Salerno, established in the 9th century, became the first organized medical school in Western Europe and earned the title Civitas Hippocratica, City of Hippocrates. Located in southern Italy, Salerno was ideally positioned to receive influences from both Islamic and Byzantine medical traditions while maintaining connections to Western European scholarship. Salerno's approach to medical education was revolutionary for its time. The school established formal curricula, required examinations for graduation, and insisted that students complete practical training in addition to theoretical studies. The school's regulations, codified in the 12th century, required 3 years of preliminary study followed by 5 years of medical education and 1 year of practical experience under supervision. The diversity of Salerno's faculty and student body was remarkable. The school welcomed scholars from across Europe, the Islamic world, and Byzantium, creating an international center of medical learning. Women also played significant roles at Salerno, both as students and teachers, which was unusual for medieval educational institutions. The school's most famous text, the Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum, provided practical health advice in verse form, making medical knowledge accessible to a broader audience. This work covered diet, exercise, sleep, and emotional well-being, reflecting Salerno's holistic approach to health maintenance and disease prevention. The rise of universities and medical faculties. The 12th and 13th centuries saw the establishment of universities throughout Europe, many of which included medical faculties. The University of Bologna, 1088, the University of Paris, 1150, and the University of Montpellier, 1289, all developed distinguished medical programs that attracted students from across Europe. Medieval medical education in universities was based on the study of authoritative texts, particularly the works of Hippocrates, Galen, Avicenna, and Al-Razi. Students spent years mastering these texts through lectures, disputations, and examinations. The emphasis was on theoretical knowledge and textual authority rather than practical experience or empirical observation. The medieval university medical curriculum typically required 7 years of study. Students began with the liberal arts, grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music, before proceeding to medical studies. The medical curriculum included natural philosophy, anatomy, pathology, therapeutics, and medical ethics. Despite its limitations, the university system established medicine as a learned profession and created standards for medical education that persisted for centuries. The degree requirements, examination systems, and professional standards developed during this period laid the foundation for modern medical education. Medieval medical education was deeply influenced by the scholastic method, which emphasized logical analysis, systematic argumentation, and the reconciliation of different authorities. Medical scholars engaged in elaborate theoretical debates about fundamental questions such as the nature of disease, the mechanisms of healing, and the relationship between body and soul. These debates, while sometimes appearing abstract to modern readers, served important functions in medieval medical education. They developed students' analytical skills, encouraged careful reading of authoritative texts, and promoted systematic thinking about medical problems. The scholastic method also encouraged the integration of medical knowledge with broader philosophical and theological frameworks. One of the most significant debates concerned the relationship between medicine and religion. Medieval physicians had to reconcile their medical practice with Christian doctrine, particularly regarding the role of divine intervention in health and disease. This led to sophisticated discussions about natural and supernatural causation, the ethics of medical intervention, and the physician's responsibility to both patient and God. While university-educated physicians focused on theoretical medicine, surgical practice remained largely in the hands of craftsmen and specialists who learned through apprenticeship rather than formal education. This division between medicine and surgery, unknown in the Islamic world, would persist in Europe for centuries. Medieval surgeons developed considerable skill despite their lower social status and limited formal education. They performed routine procedures such as cataract extraction, bladder stone removal, and the treatment of wounds and fractures. Some surgeons achieved great renown, such as Hugh of Lucca and his son Theodoric, who challenged traditional wound treatment by advocating for the cleaning and suturing of wounds rather than promoting suppuration. The Crusades provided surgical experience for European practitioners, who encountered new types of injuries and had opportunities to observe Islamic surgical techniques. This practical experience complemented the theoretical knowledge gained from translated texts, leading to improvements in European surgical practice. Medieval surgery was limited by several factors, including the lack of effective anesthesia, inadequate understanding of anatomy, and the absence of antiseptic techniques. However, medieval surgeons developed considerable skill within these constraints and made important contributions to surgical technique and instrumentation. Medieval understanding of anatomy and physiology was dominated by Galenic theory, which provided a comprehensive explanation of bodily structure and function. According to Galen, the body contained three systems: the natural system, concerned with nutrition and growth; the vital system, concerned with life and the emotions; and the animal system, concerned with sensation and movement. This tripartite system was closely connected to humoral theory. The liver produced blood and governed the natural system, the heart produced vital spirit and governed the vital system, and the brain produced animal spirit and governed the animal system. Each system had its own set of organs, vessels, and functions, creating a complex but coherent physiological model. Medieval physicians also believed in the doctrine of signatures, which held that natural substances bore signs indicating their therapeutic uses. A plant's color, shape, or other characteristics were thought to reveal its medicinal properties. This doctrine influenced both pharmaceutical practice and anatomical understanding, as physicians looked for correspondences between bodily structures and their functions. The prohibition of dissection and its consequences. One of the most significant factors shaping medieval anatomy was the general prohibition of human dissection in Christian Europe. This prohibition was based on religious beliefs about the sanctity of the human body and concerns about bodily resurrection. As a result, medieval European physicians relied primarily on Galenic anatomical descriptions, which were based on animal dissection and often inaccurate when applied to human anatomy. However, the prohibition was not absolute, and exceptions were occasionally made for legal or educational purposes. The first recorded human dissection in medieval Europe took place at the University of Bologna in 1315, performed by Mondino de Luzzi, circa 1270 to 1326. This event marked the beginning of a slow but significant change in European attitudes toward anatomical investigation. The gradual acceptance of human dissection in the 13th and 14th centuries was driven by several factors. Legal authorities needed anatomical evidence in cases involving violent death. Medical schools required anatomical knowledge for proper education, and physicians recognized the limitations of animal-based anatomy for understanding human disease. Islamic contributions to anatomy. In contrast to the European situation, Islamic physicians made significant advances in anatomical knowledge through careful observation and limited dissection. While Islamic religious law also generally prohibited human dissection, Islamic physicians were more willing to perform anatomical investigations when medically necessary. Al-Razi made important anatomical observations, particularly regarding the nervous system and the eye. His descriptions of certain anatomical structures were more accurate than those found in Galenic texts, reflecting direct observation rather than reliance on ancient authority. Ibn al-Nafis, 1213 to 1288, made perhaps the most significant anatomical discovery of the medieval period when he described the pulmonary circulation of blood. His observation that blood passes from the right ventricle of the heart to the left ventricle through the lungs, rather than through pores in the ventricular septum as Galen had claimed, was a major breakthrough in cardiovascular physiology. Medieval physiological theory was based on the concept of innate heat, which was thought to be the fundamental principle of life. This heat, centered in the heart, was responsible for all vital functions including digestion, circulation, and sensation. Disease was understood as a disturbance in this natural heat, caused by humoral imbalance or external factors. The medieval understanding of circulation was quite different from modern knowledge. Following Galenic theory, medieval physicians believed that blood was produced in the liver and consumed in the tissues, rather than circulating continuously through the body. The heart was seen as the source of vital spirit, which was distributed through the arteries along with blood. Respiration was understood as a cooling mechanism for the heart's natural heat, with air entering the lungs to moderate the heart's temperature. This understanding, while incorrect, provided a coherent explanation for the relationship between breathing, circulation, and life that satisfied medieval physicians. The 13th and 14th centuries saw the production of several important anatomical texts that reflected new observations and changing attitudes toward anatomical investigation. Mondino de Luzzi's Anatomia, completed around 1316, was the first systematic anatomical text based on human dissection since ancient times. Mondino's work was organized as a practical guide for performing dissections, with detailed instructions for exposing and examining different body systems. While still heavily influenced by Galenic theory, the text included original observations and corrections to ancient anatomical descriptions. The development of anatomical illustration also advanced during this period. Medieval anatomical texts began to include diagrams and drawings that complemented textual descriptions. These illustrations, while often schematic rather than realistic, helped students visualize anatomical relationships and understand complex structures. The development of medieval medical institutions began with Christian monasteries, which established infirmaries to care for sick monks and, increasingly, members of the local community. These monastic infirmaries represented a new approach to medical care, emphasizing compassion, charity, and spiritual healing alongside physical treatment. The Rule of Saint Benedict, written in the 6th century, specifically mandated care for the sick, stating that care of the sick is to be placed above and before all else, so that they may truly be served as Christ. This religious imperative drove the development of sophisticated medical facilities within monastic communities. Monastic infirmaries were typically well-equipped facilities with separate buildings for different types of patients, herb gardens for medicinal plants, and libraries containing medical texts. The Abbey of St. Gall in Switzerland, whose 9th century plan survives, included a sophisticated medical complex with an infirmary, physician's house, herb garden, and bloodletting house. The monastic approach to medicine was fundamentally holistic, viewing illness as potentially having spiritual as well as physical causes. Monks provided not only medical treatment but also spiritual counseling, confession, and prayer for healing. This integration of spiritual and physical healing became a defining characteristic of medieval Christian medicine. The 11th and 12th centuries witnessed the emergence of true hospitals as institutions dedicated primarily to medical care. These hospitals, influenced by Islamic models encountered during the Crusades, represented a significant advance over earlier monastic infirmaries in terms of size, organization, and medical sophistication. The Hospital of St. John in Jerusalem, established by the Knights Hospitaller around 1080, became a model for hospital development throughout Europe. This institution could accommodate up to 2,000 patients and provided sophisticated medical care including surgery, pharmacy services, and specialized treatment for different conditions. European hospitals of this period were typically founded and funded by religious organizations, wealthy individuals, or civic authorities as acts of charity. The Hôtel Dieu in Paris, founded in the 7th century but greatly expanded in the 12th century, became one of the largest and most influential hospitals in medieval Europe. The organization of medieval hospitals varied considerably, but most included several common features: separate wards for men and women, facilities for different types of illnesses, chapels for spiritual care, pharmacies for drug preparation, and quarters for staff. Larger hospitals often included medical schools or training programs for physicians and nurses. Hospital administration and staffing. Medieval hospitals developed sophisticated administrative structures to manage their complex operations. Most hospitals were governed by religious orders or lay brotherhoods that provided both spiritual leadership and practical management. The master or prior of a hospital held ultimate authority, while day-to-day operations were managed by appointed officials responsible for different aspects of care. The medical staff of medieval hospitals included physicians, surgeons, apothecaries, and various types of attendants. Physicians, usually university-educated, provided diagnosis and prescribed treatments. Surgeons handled wounds, fractures, and surgical procedures. Apothecaries prepared and dispensed medications according to physicians' prescriptions. Nursing care was provided primarily by religious personnel, both male and female, who combined medical care with spiritual ministration. Some hospitals also employed lay attendants for routine care tasks. The quality of nursing care varied considerably, but the best medieval hospitals provided attentive, skilled nursing that contributed significantly to patient recovery. The financing of medieval hospitals was a constant challenge. Most institutions depended on a combination of endowments, donations, fees from wealthy patients, and income from agricultural lands or other properties. Some hospitals received support from civic authorities or royal patronage, but financial stability was always precarious. Specialized medical institutions. The later medieval period saw the development of specialized medical institutions designed to address specific health problems. Leper hospitals, or leprosaria, were established throughout Europe to care for victims of leprosy, which was both feared and misunderstood during this period. These institutions served multiple functions. They provided care for lepers, isolated them from the general population, and offered spiritual comfort to people facing a feared and incurable disease. While the isolation of lepers was based on mistaken beliefs about contagion, these institutions often provided good medical care and helped maintain the dignity of their residents. Mental health institutions also began to appear during the medieval period, though care for the mentally ill was often inadequate. The Bethlehem Royal Hospital in London, founded in 1247, originally served as a general hospital but gradually specialized in caring for the mentally ill, becoming the notorious Bedlam of later centuries. Some hospitals specialized in caring for specific populations such as pilgrims, travelers, or particular occupational groups. These specialized institutions reflected the growing sophistication of medieval medical care and the recognition that different populations might have different medical needs. The impact of the Black Death on medical institutions. The Black Death of 1347 to 1351 posed an unprecedented challenge to medieval medical institutions. The plague killed an estimated 1/3 of Europe's population and overwhelmed existing medical facilities. Many hospitals were forced to close as staff died or fled, while others struggled to cope with the enormous influx of plague victims. The plague crisis led to significant changes in hospital organization and medical practice. Some institutions established separate facilities for plague victims, while others developed new approaches to infection control. The crisis also highlighted the limitations of existing medical knowledge and prompted some physicians to question traditional authorities. Despite the devastation, many medical institutions survived the plague and emerged stronger. The crisis demonstrated the value of organized medical care and led to increased support for hospitals from both secular and religious authorities. New hospitals were founded in the plague's aftermath, often with improved designs and better funding arrangements. The plague also stimulated developments in public health measures, as civic authorities recognized the need for coordinated responses to epidemic disease. This led to the establishment of public health boards, quarantine procedures, and improved sanitation measures that would influence medical practice for centuries. Medieval pharmacology was built upon a foundation of herbal medicine that combined ancient Greek and Roman knowledge with folk traditions, Islamic innovations, and direct observation of plant properties. This complex tradition produced an extensive pharmacopoeia that included hundreds of plant, animal, and mineral substances used for therapeutic purposes. The theoretical basis for medieval pharmacology was the doctrine of humoral qualities, which held that all substances possessed combinations of the four basic qualities: hot, cold, wet, and dry. Drugs were classified according to these qualities and their degrees of intensity, creating a systematic framework for understanding therapeutic action. Medieval herbals, beginning with the 9th century, herbarium, attributed to Apuleius Platonicus, provided detailed descriptions of medicinal plants, their preparation, and their uses. These texts combined textual authority with practical knowledge, often including both ancient prescriptions and contemporary observations. The Circa Instans, compiled in Salerno around 1140, represented a significant advance in pharmaceutical literature. This work provided detailed descriptions of nearly 300 substances, including their identification, preparation, and therapeutic applications. The text's systematic approach and practical orientation made it one of the most influential pharmaceutical texts of the medieval period. Islamic physicians and pharmacists made revolutionary contributions to pharmaceutical science, developing new drugs, improving preparation methods, and establishing standards for pharmaceutical practice. The Islamic approach to pharmacy was characterized by careful observation, systematic experimentation, and detailed documentation of results. Al-Kindi, 801 to 873 CE, produced one of the earliest systematic pharmaceutical texts, the De Gradibus, which provided precise instructions for determining the degrees of heat, cold, wetness, and dryness in compound medicines. This mathematical approach to pharmacy was innovative and influenced pharmaceutical practice for centuries. The great Islamic pharmacist Ibn al-Baytar, 1197 to 1248, compiled the most comprehensive pharmaceutical work of the medieval period, the Kitab al-Jami fi al-Adwiya al-Mufrada. This enormous work described over 1,400 medicinal substances, including many previously unknown plants and minerals. Ibn al-Baytar's systematic approach included detailed botanical descriptions, preparation methods, and therapeutic applications based on both textual sources and personal observation. Islamic pharmacists also developed new pharmaceutical techniques including distillation, sublimation, crystallization, and various methods of extraction and purification. These innovations produced more effective medicines and established pharmaceutical chemistry as a scientific discipline. Medieval compound medicines. Medieval physicians relied heavily on compound medicines that combined multiple ingredients to address complex medical conditions. These compounds, based on ancient Greek formulations but modified through Islamic innovations and medieval experience, represented sophisticated attempts to balance therapeutic effects and minimize adverse reactions. The most famous medieval compound medicines were theriacs and mithridates, complex preparations containing dozens or even hundreds of ingredients. Originally developed as antidotes to poison, these preparations came to be used as general panaceas for various ailments. The preparation of theriac became a public ceremony in major cities, with apothecaries demonstrating their skill and ensuring the authenticity of their products. Medieval physicians also used a variety of simpler compound medicines tailored to specific conditions. These included electuaries, medicines mixed with honey or syrup, confections, medicines incorporated into sweet preparations, and various types of pills and powders. The preparation of these medicines required considerable skill and knowledge of pharmaceutical techniques. The standardization of compound medicines was a significant achievement of medieval pharmacy. Authoritative texts provided precise recipes and preparation methods, ensuring consistency and quality across different regions and time periods. This standardization was essential for the development of professional pharmaceutical practice. Medieval therapeutics was based on the principle of contraries, treating disease by applying substances with qualities opposite to those causing the illness. A fever, considered hot, would be treated with cold medicines, while a condition characterized by excessive moisture would be treated with dry remedies. Purging and bloodletting were central to medieval therapeutic practice, based on the theory that disease resulted from the accumulation of corrupt humors that needed to be expelled from the body. These practices, while often harmful by modern standards, were based on coherent theoretical principles and sometimes provided relief for certain conditions. Medieval physicians also employed a variety of external treatments including poultices, ointments, baths, and fumigations. These treatments were often combined with internal medicines to provide comprehensive therapy for complex conditions. The integration of multiple therapeutic approaches reflected the holistic nature of medieval medicine. Diet and regimen were considered fundamental aspects of medieval therapeutics. Physicians provided detailed advice about food, drink, exercise, sleep, and emotional state, recognizing that lifestyle factors played crucial roles in health and disease. This emphasis on preventive medicine through proper regimen was one of the most sophisticated aspects of medieval medical practice. The 12th and 13th centuries witnessed the emergence of pharmacy as a distinct profession separate from medicine. This development was particularly pronounced in Islamic lands and Southern Europe, where apothecaries established independent shops and developed specialized expertise in pharmaceutical preparation. The regulation of pharmaceutical practice became increasingly important as the profession developed. Frederick II's constitutions for the Kingdom of Sicily, 1240, established some of the first pharmaceutical regulations in Europe, requiring apothecaries to pass examinations, maintain standards for drug preparation, and work under physician supervision. Professional apothecaries developed sophisticated facilities for pharmaceutical preparation, including laboratories equipped with distillation apparatus, mortars and pestles for grinding drugs, and various vessels for mixing and storing medicines. These facilities represented significant investments and demonstrated the growing importance of pharmaceutical expertise. The relationship between physicians and apothecaries was sometimes tense, as each profession sought to define its proper sphere of activity. Physicians claimed authority over diagnosis and prescription, while apothecaries asserted their expertise in pharmaceutical preparation and sometimes in therapeutic advice. These professional tensions reflected the growing sophistication and specialization of medieval medical practice. Medieval surgery occupied a complex position within the medical hierarchy. While surgical techniques advanced significantly during the medieval period, surgeons generally held lower social status than university-educated physicians. This distinction, largely unknown in the Islamic world, became entrenched in Western European medical practice and would persist for centuries. The division between medicine and surgery in medieval Europe reflected broader social and intellectual hierarchies. Medicine was considered a liberal art requiring university education and theoretical knowledge, while surgery was viewed as a mechanical craft learned through apprenticeship and manual practice. This distinction ignored the considerable skill and knowledge required for surgical practice and limited the integration of surgical and medical knowledge. Despite their lower status, medieval surgeons developed remarkable expertise within the constraints of their time. They performed routine procedures such as cataract extraction, bladder stone removal, hernia repair, and the treatment of wounds and fractures. Some surgeons achieved considerable renown and attracted patients from great distances, demonstrating that surgical skill was recognized and valued even if the profession itself was not highly regarded. The Crusades provided significant opportunities for surgical experience and cross-cultural exchange. European surgeons encountered new types of injuries and had opportunities to observe Islamic surgical techniques. This practical experience, combined with the translation of Islamic surgical texts, led to improvements in European surgical practice and the development of new techniques and instruments. Islamic surgical excellence. The Islamic world produced some of the medieval period's most accomplished surgeons, who developed innovative techniques, invented new instruments, and advanced surgical education. Islamic surgeons enjoyed higher social status than their European counterparts and were often university-educated physicians who specialized in surgical practice. Al-Zahrawi, Abulcasis, was the most influential medieval surgeon, whose Al-Tasrif provided comprehensive coverage of surgical theory and practice. His detailed descriptions of surgical procedures, accompanied by illustrations of instruments and techniques, set new standards for surgical literature. Al-Zahrawi's innovations included new surgical instruments, improved techniques for various procedures, and advances in wound care and post-operative management. Islamic surgeons made particular advances in ophthalmic surgery, developing sophisticated techniques for cataract extraction and other eye procedures. They also advanced urological surgery, particularly the removal of bladder stones, and made important contributions to orthopedic surgery and the treatment of fractures and dislocations. The integration of surgery with general medical practice in the Islamic world led to more comprehensive patient care and better surgical outcomes. Islamic surgeons understood anatomy and physiology better than their European counterparts and could provide both surgical and medical treatment for their patients. European surgical development. Despite the social constraints and professional divisions that limited surgical practice in medieval Europe, significant advances were made by skilled practitioners who combined traditional techniques with new knowledge gained from Islamic sources and practical experience. The Italian surgical schools, particularly those in Salerno and Bologna, played crucial roles in advancing European surgical practice. These institutions provided more systematic surgical education than the traditional apprenticeship system and helped integrate surgical knowledge with broader medical understanding. Hugh of Lucca, 1160–1257, and his son Theodoric Borgognoni, 1205–1298, made important contributions to wound care and surgical technique. They challenged the traditional belief that suppuration was necessary for wound healing, instead advocating for the cleaning and primary closure of wounds. This approach, derived from their observation of better outcomes with clean wounds, represented a significant advance in surgical practice. Henri de Mondeville, 1260–1320, wrote one of the first systematic surgical texts in Europe, the Chirurgia, which combined practical surgical instruction with theoretical knowledge. His work emphasized the importance of anatomical knowledge for surgical practice and provided detailed descriptions of various procedures and their complications. Guy de Chauliac, 1300–1368, produced the most comprehensive European surgical text of the medieval period, Chirurgia Magna, which synthesized classical, Islamic, and contemporary European surgical knowledge. His work remained influential for centuries and helped establish surgery as a legitimate medical specialty. Medieval dental and oral surgery, while primitive by modern standards, addressed real medical needs and developed effective techniques within the limitations of contemporary knowledge and technology. Dental problems were common in medieval populations due to diet, poor hygiene, and lack of preventive care. Medieval dental practitioners, often called tooth pullers, were usually craftsmen rather than university-educated physicians. However, some accomplished surgeons also practiced dentistry, and surgical texts included sections on dental and oral procedures. The most common dental procedures were tooth extraction and the treatment of oral diseases. Medieval practitioners developed various instruments for tooth extraction and techniques for managing the pain and complications associated with these procedures. Some practitioners also attempted tooth replacement using carved ivory or animal teeth, though these efforts were rarely successful. Islamic dental practitioners were generally more accomplished than their European counterparts, developing better instruments and techniques for dental procedures. They also made advances in the understanding of dental anatomy and the causes of dental disease. Medieval oral surgery also included the treatment of oral cancers, removal of oral tumors, and repair of traumatic injuries to the mouth and jaw. These procedures required considerable skill and often involved complex reconstructive techniques. Obstetric and gynecological surgery. Medieval obstetric and gynecological surgery addressed the significant health challenges faced by women in a period of high maternal and infant mortality. While many practitioners in this field were women who learned through traditional apprenticeships, some male physicians and surgeons also specialized in women's health. The cesarean section, while known to medieval surgeons, was rarely performed due to the extremely high mortality rate associated with the procedure. Most cesarean sections were performed post-mortem to save the infant's life, as the operation was almost invariably fatal to the mother given the lack of anesthesia, antiseptic techniques, and understanding of surgical principles. More commonly performed procedures included the treatment of difficult labor through various manipulations and the use of instruments such as hooks and forceps to extract the infant. These procedures, while often traumatic, sometimes saved the lives of both mother and child when natural delivery was impossible. Medieval practitioners also developed techniques for treating gynecological conditions such as uterine prolapse, vaginal tumors, and various infections. These procedures required considerable skill and anatomical knowledge, particularly given the taboos surrounding examination and treatment of female patients. The treatise, Gynecia, attributed to Cyranus of Ephesus, along with works by Trotula of Salerno and other medieval authors, provided guidance for obstetric and gynecological practice. These texts combined classical knowledge with contemporary experience and offered practical advice for managing women's health problems. The arrival of plague in Europe in 1347 marked one of the most catastrophic events in medieval history and posed an unprecedented challenge to medieval medical understanding and practice. The disease, carried by Genoese trading vessels from the Black Sea ports, spread rapidly throughout Europe, ultimately killing an estimated one-third of the population. Medieval physicians were completely unprepared for a pandemic of this magnitude. Their theoretical framework, based on humoral medicine and astrological influences, provided no adequate explanation for the disease's rapid spread and high mortality. The failure of traditional treatments and the collapse of normal medical care systems forced both physicians and the general population to seek new explanations and remedies. The plague's symptoms, bubonic swellings, high fever, and rapid death, were unlike anything described in classical medical texts. While physicians attempted to fit these symptoms into existing disease categories, many recognized that they were dealing with something entirely new and terrifying. The social disruption caused by the plague was enormous. Many physicians fled from affected areas, while others remained to treat patients despite the obvious personal risk. The medical profession's response to the plague crisis revealed both its limitations and its dedication to patient care under extreme circumstances. Medical explanations and theories. Medieval physicians developed various theories to explain the plague's causes and spread, drawing on their understanding of disease causation while struggling to account for the pandemic's unprecedented characteristics. These explanations reflected the theoretical frameworks available to medieval medicine and the desperate need to understand a seemingly inexplicable catastrophe. Astrological explanations were particularly popular, with many physicians attributing the plague to unfavorable planetary conjunctions or cosmic disturbances. The conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars in Aquarius in 1345 was frequently cited as the celestial cause of the pandemic. These astrological theories provided a framework for understanding the plague's timing and widespread occurrence. Miasmatic theories, which attributed disease to corrupted air or bad air, malaria, were also widely accepted. Physicians believed that the plague was caused by poisonous vapors arising from rotting matter, earthquakes, or other environmental disturbances. This theory encouraged various preventive measures aimed at purifying the air through fires, aromatic substances, and ventilation. Some physicians developed primitive concepts of contagion, recognizing that the disease spread from person to person through direct contact or proximity. While these observations were more accurate than astrological or miasmatic theories, medieval physicians lacked the conceptual framework to understand the true mechanisms of disease transmission. Religious explanations also played important roles, with many viewing the plague as divine punishment for human sins. This interpretation encouraged penitential practices and religious responses alongside medical treatments, reflecting the integration of spiritual and physical healing in medieval medicine. Treatment approaches and remedies. Medieval physicians attempted to treat plague victims using existing therapeutic approaches, modified and intensified in response to the disease's severity. These treatments, while ultimately ineffective against plague, represented systematic attempts to apply contemporary medical knowledge to an unprecedented medical crisis. Bloodletting and purging, the mainstays of medieval therapeutics, were employed extensively in plague treatment. Physicians believed that removing corrupt humors from the body would eliminate the disease's cause and restore healthy balance. However, these treatments likely weakened patients further and contributed to mortality. Various pharmaceutical preparations were developed specifically for plague treatment, including complex compounds containing numerous ingredients thought to possess anti-plague properties. These medicines often included exotic and expensive substances, reflecting both the desperation of patients and families and the physicians' attempts to create more powerful remedies. External treatments included the application of poultices to bubonic swellings, attempts to lance and drain these swellings, and various topical remedies designed to draw out the disease's poison. Some of these approaches may have provided symptomatic relief, though they could not address the underlying infection. Preventive measures included dietary recommendations, lifestyle modifications, and environmental interventions designed to avoid or counteract the plague's causes. Physicians advised avoiding corrupted air, maintaining proper humoral balance, and using various protective substances and amulets. The development of public health measures. The plague crisis stimulated the development of public health measures as civic authorities recognized the need for coordinated responses to epidemic disease. These measures, while based on imperfect understanding of disease transmission, established precedents for organized public health intervention that would influence medical practice for centuries. Quarantine procedures were among the most important innovations, with Venice establishing the first formal quarantine system in 1348. Ships arriving from infected areas were required to wait 40 days, 40 giorni, before entering port, giving rise to the term quarantine. This measure, based on observations of the disease's spread patterns, proved partially effective in limiting plague transmission. Many cities established pest houses or plague hospitals specifically for treating plague victims. These institutions served multiple functions. They provided medical care for plague patients, isolated infected individuals from the general population, and offered spiritual comfort to the dying. While the medical care available was limited, these institutions represented organized responses to the crisis. Sanitation measures were also implemented, including the cleaning of streets, disposal of corpses, and elimination of sources of corrupt air. These measures, while not directly effective against plague transmission, may have improved general health conditions and reduced the spread of other diseases. The regulation of movement and trade was another important public health intervention. Many cities restricted travel from infected areas, controlled the movement of goods that might carry infection, and established systems for monitoring and reporting disease outbreaks. The Black Death had profound long-term effects on medieval medical practice, challenging traditional authorities, stimulating new approaches to disease understanding, and highlighting the need for more effective medical interventions. The pandemic's impact extended far beyond its immediate mortality, influencing medical thought and practice for generations. The failure of traditional medical treatments during the plague crisis led some physicians to question established authorities and seek new approaches to medical practice. While most physicians continued to work within traditional frameworks, some began to emphasize observation and experience over textual authority, laying groundwork for later medical developments. The plague also stimulated interest in anatomy and pathology, as physicians sought better understanding of disease processes. The need to understand plague's effects on the body encouraged more systematic observation of disease symptoms and post-mortem examination of victims, contributing to advances in medical knowledge. The development of public health measures during the plague crisis established new roles for civic authorities in medical matters and created precedents for organized responses to epidemic disease. These developments would prove crucial for dealing with subsequent disease outbreaks and contributed to the gradual emergence of public health as a distinct field. The plague's social and economic disruptions also affected medical education and practice. Many medical schools were forced to close or modify their programs, while the high mortality among physicians created shortages that persisted for decades. These changes encouraged innovations in medical education and practice that would influence the profession's development. Chapter 9. Women in Medieval Medicine. Traditional roles and healing practices. Women played crucial but often under-recognized roles in medieval medical practice, serving as healers, midwives, herbalists, and medical practitioners across all social levels. Their contributions were essential to medical care, particularly in rural areas and among the poor, where formal medical services were often unavailable or unaffordable. Traditional female healing roles were based on extensive knowledge of herbal medicines, practical nursing skills, and specialized expertise in women's health and childbirth. This knowledge was typically passed down through generations of women, creating networks of female medical expertise that operated alongside and sometimes in competition with formal medical practice. Women's medical practice was often integrated with their domestic responsibilities, as they were expected to care for sick family members and maintain household health. This integration gave women extensive practical experience with medical problems and treatments, though it also limited their opportunities for formal medical education and professional recognition. The gendered nature of medieval medicine reflected broader social hierarchies and religious beliefs about women's roles and capabilities. While women were considered naturally suited for certain aspects of medical care, particularly nursing and midwifery, they were generally excluded from university education and formal medical practice. Monastic women and medical care. Female religious communities played important roles in medieval medical care, establishing infirmaries, hospitals, and specialized institutions for caring for the sick. These communities provided women with opportunities for medical education and practice that were unavailable in secular society. The Benedictine tradition particularly emphasized care for the sick, and many female monasteries developed sophisticated medical facilities and expertise. These institutions cared for both their own members and members of the surrounding community, providing medical services that were often superior to those available elsewhere. Some female religious communities specialized in particular aspects of medical care, such as care for lepers, pilgrims, or the mentally ill. These specialized institutions required considerable medical knowledge and organizational skill, demonstrating women's capabilities in medical administration and practice. The medical manuscripts produced in female monasteries reveal extensive medical knowledge and practical experience. These texts often combined classical medical learning with contemporary observations and practical advice, contributing to the preservation and development of medical knowledge. The School of Salerno and Female Physicians. The medical school of Salerno was unusual in medieval Europe for its inclusion of women as both students and teachers. This openness reflected Salerno's cosmopolitan character and its emphasis on practical medical knowledge over theoretical learning. The most famous female physician associated with Salerno was Trotula, whose identity and works have been the subject of considerable scholarly debate. Whether Trotula was a single individual or a name associated with multiple female practitioners, the texts attributed to her represent sophisticated understanding of women's health and medical practice. The Trotula texts, including works on gynecology, cosmetics, and general medicine, demonstrate extensive knowledge of medical theory and practice. These works were widely copied and translated, indicating their influence on medieval medical practice throughout Europe. Other women associated with the Salerno school include Abella, who wrote treatises on black bile and the nature of semen, and Rebecca de Garna, who authored works on fevers, the embryo, and urine. These attributions, while sometimes uncertain, indicate women's participation in the intellectual life of medieval medicine's most important educational institution: midwifery and women's health. Midwifery was perhaps the most important and widely recognized area of female medical expertise in medieval Europe. Midwives provided essential services for childbirth and women's health, possessing knowledge and skills that were generally unavailable from male practitioners. Medieval midwifery encompassed much more than assistance during childbirth. Midwives provided prenatal care, treated gynecological conditions, advised on contraception and fertility, and cared for newborn infants. Their expertise was based on extensive practical experience and traditional knowledge passed down through generations of practitioners. The training of midwives was typically informal, based on apprenticeship with experienced practitioners and gradual accumulation of practical experience. However, some areas developed more formal systems of midwifery education and regulation, recognizing the importance of skilled practitioners for maternal and infant health. Midwives held important social positions in their communities, serving not only as medical practitioners but also as advisors on intimate matters and witnesses to family events. Their testimony was legally recognized in cases involving legitimacy, rape, and other matters requiring intimate knowledge of women's bodies and experiences. The relationship between midwives and male physicians was often complex, involving both cooperation and competition. While physicians generally acknowledged midwives' expertise in childbirth, they sometimes sought to regulate or limit midwifery practice to protect their own professional interests. Female religious healers and mystics. Medieval Christianity produced numerous female religious figures who combined spiritual life with medical practice, viewing healing as a form of religious service and spiritual expression. These women often developed reputations for miraculous healing abilities, though their practices typically combined prayer and religious ritual with practical medical treatments. Hildegard of Bingen, 1098 to 1179, was perhaps the most accomplished of these religious healers, producing comprehensive works on medicine and natural history alongside her theological and musical compositions. Her Physica and Causae et Curae demonstrated extensive knowledge of herbal medicine, anatomy, and therapeutic practice. Hildegard's medical works were based on her understanding of the human body as a microcosm of the universe, reflecting divine order and cosmic influences. Her treatments combined herbal medicines with dietary advice, lifestyle recommendations, and spiritual practices, creating a holistic approach to healing that was characteristic of medieval medicine at its best. Other female religious figures known for their healing activities include Catherine of Siena, who cared for plague victims, Julian of Norwich, whose Revelations of Divine Love includes references to healing practices, and numerous local saints and mystics whose healing reputations attracted pilgrims and patients from great distances. These female religious healers played important roles in preserving and transmitting medical knowledge, particularly in areas where formal medical education was unavailable. Their integration of spiritual and physical healing reflected medieval medicine's holistic character and demonstrated women's contributions to medical theory and practice. Challenges and limitations. Despite their essential contributions to medieval medical care, women faced significant challenges and limitations in medical practice. Legal restrictions, social conventions, and religious beliefs limited women's opportunities for formal medical education and professional recognition. The exclusion of women from universities meant that they could not obtain the formal qualifications necessary for high-status medical practice. This limitation relegated most female practitioners to lower-status positions and limited their income and professional advancement opportunities. Women's medical practice was also subject to various forms of regulation and control by male authorities. Church and secular officials sometimes restricted women's medical activities, particularly when these conflicted with male physicians' interests or challenged social conventions about women's proper roles. The association of some female healing practices with witchcraft and heresy created additional dangers for women practitioners. While most female healers were accepted and valued members of their communities, some faced accusations of supernatural practices or harmful magic, particularly during periods of social stress or religious persecution. Despite these challenges, women continued to play essential roles in medieval medical care, demonstrating remarkable resilience and dedication to healing practices. Their contributions were crucial to the health and survival of medieval populations and helped preserve and develop medical knowledge across the centuries. Changing attitudes toward authority and observation. The later medieval period witnessed gradual but significant changes in medical attitudes toward traditional authority and the role of direct observation in medical practice. While respect for classical authorities like Galen and Avicenna remained strong, some physicians began to question these authorities when their teachings conflicted with observed experience. The University of Padua emerged as a center for innovative medical education and research during this period. Paduan physicians like Pietro Diabano, 1250–1316, and later professors encouraged students to compare classical texts with direct observation, laying groundwork for more empirical approaches to medical knowledge. The availability of more accurate translations of Greek medical texts, particularly those produced by Byzantine scholars fleeing to the west after Constantinople's fall in 1453, allowed medieval physicians to recognize errors and omissions in earlier Arabic and Latin translations. This textual criticism contributed to a more sophisticated understanding of ancient medical knowledge. The development of printing technology in the 15th century revolutionized the distribution of medical knowledge, making texts more widely available and enabling more rapid dissemination of new ideas and observations. Printed medical books also included improved illustrations that aided in medical education and practice. Anatomical advances and human dissection. The gradual acceptance of human dissection in the 14th and 15th centuries led to significant advances in anatomical knowledge and medical education. While dissection remained controversial and was strictly regulated, its practice became increasingly common in major medical schools. Guy de Chauliac's detailed anatomical descriptions in his Chirurgia Magna reflected extensive experience with human dissection and provided more accurate information than many earlier texts. His work demonstrated the value of direct observation for understanding human anatomy and disease processes. The establishment of regular anatomical demonstrations at universities like Bologna, Padua, and Paris created systematic opportunities for medical students to observe human anatomy directly. These demonstrations, while formal and highly ritualized, represented significant advances over purely textual anatomical education. The development of more sophisticated anatomical illustrations, beginning with the manuscripts of Guido da Vigevano, 1280–1349, and reaching new heights in the works of Leonardo da Vinci, provided visual representations of human anatomy that complemented textual descriptions and aided in medical education. The later medieval period saw continued advances in surgical technique and the emergence of greater specialization within surgical practice. Surgeons developed new procedures, improved existing techniques, and created more sophisticated instruments for various types of surgery. Cataract surgery reached new levels of sophistication during this period, with surgeons developing improved techniques for lens extraction and post-operative care. The success rates for this procedure improved significantly, making it one of the most successful surgical interventions available to medieval patients. Urological surgery also advanced considerably, with surgeons developing new approaches to bladder stone removal and other urological conditions. These procedures required considerable skill and anatomical knowledge, demonstrating the growing sophistication of surgical practice. The treatment of hernias became more successful during this period, with surgeons developing improved techniques for hernia repair and better understanding of the anatomical factors involved in these conditions. Some surgeons specialized exclusively in hernia surgery and achieved considerable reputations for their skill. Plastic and reconstructive surgery began to emerge as specialized practices, particularly in Italy, where surgeons developed techniques for reconstructing noses and other facial features damaged in warfare or by disease. These procedures required exceptional skill and artistic sensibility in addition to medical knowledge. The rise of medical humanism. The 15th century witnessed the emergence of medical humanism, a movement that sought to reform medical practice by returning to original Greek sources and rejecting what humanists saw as corruptions introduced by medieval Arabic and Latin translations. This movement had significant implications for medical education and practice. Medical humanists like Niccolò Leonicino, 1428–1524, and Thomas Linacre, 1460–1524, produced new translations of Greek medical texts that were more accurate than earlier versions. These improved translations revealed errors in medieval medical knowledge and encouraged more critical evaluation of traditional authorities. The humanist emphasis on linguistic precision and textual accuracy led to more careful reading of classical medical texts and better understanding of ancient medical theories and practices. This scholarly approach contributed to improvements in medical knowledge and practice. However, medical humanism also had conservative tendencies, as some humanists rejected medieval innovations in favor of pure classical knowledge. This conservative aspect of the movement sometimes hindered medical progress and discouraged original observation and experimentation. Developments in medical education. Medical education underwent significant changes during the later medieval period, with universities refining their curricula, improving their teaching methods, and expanding their facilities for practical instruction. These changes reflected growing sophistication in medical knowledge and increasing demand for well-trained physicians. The University of Montpellier became particularly renowned for its medical program, attracting students from throughout Europe and developing innovative approaches to medical education that combined theoretical learning with practical experience. The development of university-affiliated hospitals provided new opportunities for clinical instruction, allowing students to observe disease processes and treatment outcomes directly. This integration of hospital-based learning with university education represented a significant advance in medical pedagogy. The production of medical textbooks specifically designed for student use became more common during this period, with authors like Bartholomew's Anglicus and Bernard of Gordon producing comprehensive texts that synthesized contemporary medical knowledge for educational purposes. Medical examinations became more rigorous and standardized, ensuring that graduates possessed adequate knowledge and skills for professional practice. These examination systems contributed to the professionalization of medicine and helped maintain standards of medical education across different institutions. The impact of printing on medical knowledge. The invention of movable type printing in the mid-15th century had profound implications for the dissemination of medical knowledge. Printed medical books were more affordable, more accurate, and more widely available than handwritten manuscripts, democratizing access to medical information. The first printed medical books appeared in the 1460s, and by 1500, hundreds of medical titles had been published. These included both classical texts and contemporary works, making the entire corpus of medical knowledge more accessible to students and practitioners. Printed anatomical illustrations reached new levels of accuracy and detail, providing visual representations of human anatomy that were far superior to earlier manuscript illustrations. These images revolutionized anatomical education and contributed to advances in medical understanding. The standardization of medical texts through printing helped eliminate the errors and variations that characterized manuscript copying, ensuring that medical knowledge was transmitted more accurately across time and distance. The increased availability of medical books also stimulated medical writing, as authors could reach larger audiences and expect greater financial returns from their work. This encouragement led to the production of more comprehensive and sophisticated medical literature. Conclusion: the legacy of medieval medicine. The transformation of medical knowledge. The medieval period witnessed a remarkable transformation in medical knowledge, from the preservation of classical texts in monasteries and Islamic institutions to the establishment of sophisticated medical schools and hospitals throughout Europe and the Islamic world. This transformation was not simply a recovery of ancient knowledge but involved significant innovations, adaptations, and original contributions that would influence medical practice for centuries. Medieval medicine successfully synthesized diverse intellectual traditions, combining Greek theoretical frameworks with Islamic clinical innovations, Christian concepts of charity and care, and folk healing traditions. This synthesis created a rich and complex medical tradition that was both theoretically sophisticated and practically applicable. The institutional developments of the medieval period, universities, hospitals, professional organizations, and regulatory systems established the framework for modern medical practice. These institutions provided systematic medical education, organized medical care, and professional standards that continue to influence medical practice today. The medieval emphasis on holistic approaches to health and disease, while sometimes limiting scientific inquiry, provided valuable insights into the relationships between physical, psychological, social, and spiritual factors in health and illness. This holistic perspective offers important lessons for contemporary medicine. The continuity between medieval and modern medicine. While medieval medical theories were eventually replaced by more accurate understanding of anatomy, physiology, and disease processes, many aspects of medieval medical practice continue to influence modern medicine. The ethical frameworks established during the medieval period, the institutional structures developed for medical education and care, and the professional standards created for medical practice all provide continuity between medieval and modern medicine. The medieval emphasis on careful clinical observation, systematic documentation of cases, and comparative evaluation of treatments established methodological approaches that remain fundamental to medical practice. Medieval physicians' attention to individual variation, environmental factors, and lifestyle influences on health anticipated many concerns of contemporary medicine. The international character of medieval medicine, with knowledge and practitioners moving freely across cultural and political boundaries, established patterns of scientific collaboration and exchange that continue to characterize medical research and practice. Lessons from medieval medical history. The study of medieval medicine offers important lessons for understanding both the possibilities and limitations of medical knowledge and practice. Medieval physicians worked within theoretical frameworks that we now know to be incorrect, yet they often achieved remarkable therapeutic successes through careful observation, practical experience, and compassionate care. Medieval medicine demonstrates the importance of institutional support for medical knowledge and practice. The monasteries, hospitals, universities, and professional organizations that characterized medieval medicine were essential for preserving, transmitting, and developing medical knowledge. Contemporary medical institutions serve similar functions and face similar challenges. The medieval integration of medical practice with broader philosophical, theological, and social frameworks offers important insights into the relationships between medicine and society. Medieval physicians understood that healing involved more than technical interventions and that effective medical practice required attention to patients' social, psychological, and spiritual needs. The enduring questions of medieval medicine. Many of the fundamental questions that concerned medieval physicians remain relevant today. How should medical knowledge be organized and taught? What is the proper relationship between theoretical knowledge and practical experience? How should medical professionals balance their obligations to individual patients with broader social responsibilities? Medieval physicians grappled with questions about the nature of disease, the mechanisms of healing, and the limits of medical intervention that continue to challenge contemporary medicine. Their approaches to these questions, while often different from modern approaches, offer valuable perspectives on enduring medical problems. The medieval emphasis on medical ethics, professional responsibility, and the physician's duty to serve patients regardless of their ability to pay established principles that remain central to medical practice. The challenges medieval physicians faced in living up to these ideals mirror those confronting contemporary medical professionals. The medieval foundation of modern medicine. The medieval period established the foundational institutions, practices, and principles upon which modern medicine was built. The universities that provided systematic medical education, the hospitals that organized medical care, the professional standards that governed medical practice, and the ethical principles that guided physician behavior all emerged during the medieval period and continue to influence modern medicine. Medieval medicine's emphasis on the integration of different knowledge traditions, its commitment to both theoretical understanding and practical application, and its recognition of the complex relationships between health, disease, and human experience provide important models for contemporary medical practice. The remarkable achievements of medieval medicine, the preservation and expansion of classical knowledge, the development of new therapeutic approaches, the establishment of sophisticated medical institutions, and the creation of international networks of medical scholarship demonstrate the creativity, dedication, and intellectual sophistication of medieval medical practitioners. While we may no longer accept medieval theories of humoral balance or astrological influences on health, we can appreciate the systematic thinking, careful observation, and compassionate care that characterized the best of medieval medical practice. These qualities remain essential to good medicine in any era and constitute the enduring legacy of medieval medicine to the modern world. The 1,000 years of medieval medicine represent one of the most important periods in the history of healing, marked by remarkable continuity and innovation, international exchange and local adaptation, theoretical sophistication, and practical effectiveness. This rich and complex tradition continues to inform our understanding of medicine as both a science and a healing art, reminding us that good medical practice requires not only technical knowledge but also wisdom, compassion, and commitment to human welfare. In studying medieval medicine, we gain not only historical knowledge but also insights into the enduring challenges and opportunities of medical practice. The medieval physicians who preserved ancient wisdom while developing new knowledge, who cared for patients while building institutions, and who combined scientific understanding with compassionate service established traditions that continue to guide and inspire medical practice today. Their legacy reminds us that medicine is not merely a technical discipline but a fundamental human endeavor dedicated to relieving suffering and promoting health and well-being for all people.